Hello and welcome to Rauta's opinion video. This time it's about too much is too much. What is too much? Now that is a very vague introduction to this one. Now let me try to get this story going before I let you loose and make your morning coffee. Now recently I got this email. Behemoth is once again releasing a new live album. And my first thought wasn't like, hey, is it gonna be good, or maybe it's interesting, but more like, huh? Again? Quick look to the metal archives, and it made pretty clear that this was like eighth live release within past 13 years, since 2008 or so. And it made my mind think a little bit. Like, okay, so 8 releases. That's like one live release per 18 months or so. So it's almost like you're releasing actual live recordings with similar track lists more often than actual studio albums, which sounds like really dubious. I had a little bit of a talk about this because I almost got like frustrated, more like annoyed, well, that's maybe a little bit exaggeration, but kind of made me think this is really stupid. I mean, I get it. Behemoth is one of the big three extreme bands when we are talking about more black metallic bands. Cradlefield being the biggest one, followed by Dimmu Borgir and Behemoth. So obviously these bands are not just some random hobbies. They are people's livelihoods. They are the kind of bands that actually make money. And I get it. People have to earn their living. And there are various ways to do that. Cradlefield recently mentioned like how they have to do weird kind of merchandise because album sales have been going down so much over the years. So touring is very essential, selling shirts, selling pants. It seems there are Behemoth pants nowadays. Selling liquors. It seems Cradlefield has a couple of whatever brands, tequila, whatever, for sales. And of course there are toys and all kind of crazy shit. I wouldn't be totally surprised, by the way, if there was like some Master of the Universe figures, like He-Man and stuff, but with Behemoth or Cradlefield versions. But back to these live recording things. Now, obviously, since bands have to keep the engines rolling, they have to, keep bills paid. And during the COVID, obviously, a lot of bands couldn't do touring, which means, in essence, a lot of people got unemployed. A lot of band members, be it the management or whatever, kind of like behind the core group, which is, again, the band, were probably quite frustrated and, fearful, like, what they're gonna do when there is no, there are no gigs, there are no tours, there's no money. And you need a lot of money to just keep the engine, even if it's not moving, but rolling. So that kind of explains the whole deal. But it also goes against what could be seen as the basic principle of extreme metal, especially when we're talking about underground stuff, or even the mid-level stuff, the gray area which falls between mainstream and underground. I mean, a lot of bands obviously go to underground because like nobody ever hears about them. Most bands don't have a really like good label, big promotion, big tours and all that stuff. And now when people in context of extreme metal mentioned mainstream bands, they're talking about these bands, aforementioned bands, and also bands like Cannibal Corpse and blah blah blah. But let's face it, these don't really have anything to do with mainstream. Mainstream such as, Metallica, which might be in many ways be the only metal band considered mainstream. I'm talking about the bands that get played, with sport events and all that stuff, You really don't hear that much metal. You might hear AC/DC, but whether or not that is actually metal or rock, well, that's a different thing. But most metal bands are not mainstream, even if they are big in terms of metal. That is, even if they have more than 1 million Facebook followers, like Behemoth, Cradlefield, and Dimmu Borgir have, or Cannibal Corpse for that matter. And while they might have lots of constant plays on streaming services such as Spotify, and while they might be making their livelihood just by having the band and making music and touring and selling merchandise, still not exactly mainstream. So, which brings us back to this very question. What is too much? Like, if you're releasing more live albums than actual studio album, it kind of starts smelling like fish. That is, it makes sound like you're trying to capitalize whatever you can be. And that kind of goes against those basic principles, if you will. Now, I'm not going to say that these so-called statements hold too much true. Like, back in the 90s, people were so much, pointing fingers at various bands. Like, hey, this band is way too commercial state. They already made their third album and now they're touring. What the hell? They're supposed to stay home. Look at the Dark Throne guys. They don't tour. They just make albums. You get the idea. But things have changed, obviously. And a lot of us metal fans are actually happy to see bands touring around the world, seeing them on stage, and we're happy to buy their merchandise. Because, hey, that's our way to show that we love these bands, or brands, as it may be. And there's nothing wrong with that as such. But as you cross certain lines, people might start, figuring out, like, is this actually just way to capitalize on things? Are you gonna make compromises so that you will sell more albums? For example, I don't like to point fingers here, but since I mentioned Behemoth already, I could actually a little bit question the band and its motives and all that stuff. Like, for example, doing these live recordings more often than albums sounds kind of dubious, because after all, you're basically selling the similar songs, the same songs, similar versions, year after year after year. And even though someone pointed out, like, okay, a couple of them were stream releases, they're not, real live albums, it still leaves like something like 6 physical albums. And then if you go even further back into the band's history, you will find a live video and all that stuff. But you can't really be mad about it once there is like audio-visual side instead of just music. You get to see the whole event as its full glory and all that stuff. It's a little bit different. However, it is kind of a crappy these days that most live albums are just DVDs, not Blu-rays, not to mention 4K Blu-rays. So when you have grainy pictures and all that stuff, which then again kind of moves a barrier towards, streaming services, which might be done in better quality. But once again, if you're selling live albums like every 2 years, which would be if we have these 6 physical live recordings in like past 13 years, it sounds like you're pushing the very same songs all over again to the audience, and people are like, yeah, take my money. Not only that, also what is worth mentioning that when these reissues came out, there's a lot of live songs, live tracks from the past, various versions and all that stuff coming out. So it's not only these 6 live recordings that you have like past 13 years, but even more if you really dig into that. And that brings me to the story of what is known as the fable, Emperor's New Clothes. At least older folks should remember that tale where these tailors kind of brought these fancy new clothes to the emperor and managed to sell them, even though technically speaking they made no clothes. It wasn't even like invisible clothes, but they were selling nothing. They were just convincing. That's a great fable. That's a great children's story, by the way, which I think everybody should read and figure out what it actually means in so many ways. Be it about politics, be it about religion, or be it about having a goofy salesman. Now, I am not so much annoyed because, I get to choose whether or not I'm gonna spend my money on these live recordings. As a review guy, I can just easily skip them. To be honest, about 95% of the time when I see, hey, there's a new live album ready to be downloaded for review or whatever, I just delete it. Why? Because it's just wasting my time. The amount of every band releasing whatever kind of a CD or vinyl or tape, it's just overwhelming. And on top of that, you get these live recordings which are basically just repeating the same old songs with almost the same kind of quality. For example, Behemoth is a great live band. Seen it a couple of times, I think 3 in total. And they play wonderfully. They are very, very professional. They do entertaining live shows. They tear those Bible pages and throw them to the audience and all kind of stuff. And, they have good songs. Can't deny that. But do I really need to have, say, 5 or 10 different versions of those same hit songs? Now, we'll actually hear the difference. On top of that, I actually prefer studio versions pretty much always more than live ones. When I go to see a show at a festival or at a private gig or whatever. I mean, it's a different story. You can smell the sweat. You can see the other people have those beers and, whatever. That's a very, very different thing. It's almost like watching adult entertainment on your TV screen or monitor versus being there at the real deal in the bedroom or whatever the place is. There's that kind of a difference for me. So I get it. A lot of people want to see live, shows on their TV screen, DVD quality or otherwise. But for me, it's just basically selling the same product all over again. Now, some people were also asking when I was pitching about it, like, hey, who cares? Actually, nobody really should care. I mean, we can choose to go the very nihilist ways and ignorant ways, like, who cares? We're all gonna die and all that stuff. So if we start caring, that's one way to approach any kind of a topic in the world. But I think it's also worth mentioning that this is a crazy way that some bands are gonna do it. Also, I read a recent interview with Jarkko Ahola, the vocalist of Teräsbetoni, the Finnish Manowar, if you will, and other projects he has done in Finnish rock and metal music and other styles. And there was this conversation about how much he can do the music he loves versus the music he has to do in order to pay his bills. And, even though it wasn't approached with some kind of a critical sense in this Finnish interview, but it was kind of a mention like, yeah, you have to do certain kind of a compromises. You really can't pay your bills. You really can't make your livelihood just by, singing heavy metal. Which kind of brings us to the fact that a lot of artists these days, in this kind of territory anyway, especially in Finland, the small region, small language and all that stuff, you kind of have to go back to regular work. Instead of being, cashier or being a clerk at a store or, selling meat at the whatever counter or, selling secondhand cars. You can, of course, be this kind of a hard vocalist for hire, freelancer vocalist, and then you just do those gigs in order to pay your bills, and then you could, have your hobby, like, for example, metal band, to cater your needs, to have your artistic visions done. But he also pointed out he's very, very busy because of all this stuff. Which brings me to a lot of questions. Which kind of artist is actually happier? The one who has his band as a hobby, who doesn't have this kind of a commercial pressure like, are we gonna make enough money in order to keep the whole organization going on? Can I buy my next Porsche? And things like that. Versus the guys who are like, hey, I only do this for fun. I only do this to cater my needs as an artist or a musician or whatever. And I go the regular work so I don't have to sacrifice my music. Like, for example, the last Behemoth studio album felt like it's almost like a different band. One of the worst releases by the band, by the way. And even though it's not a bad album, it felt like now this is definitely something that is going to be sacrificed as a lamb. Like, to boost more sales, not so much stay true to the path what was laid with the Satanist and the albums before that. Now, of course, these are matters of taste, and some people are gonna be annoyed because I said nasty things about Behemoth. But mind you, this is not so much about Behemoth alone. There are lots of bands who have been doing this kind of stuff. And of course, people mentioned Kiss, one of the biggest rock things ever in the world. And people were like, hey, what about Kiss? And I like, can you really compare extreme metal bands to Kiss, which has been a big ass business since, well, almost day one. Now, I don't know, but it was kind of surprising to me to notice that even Kiss doesn't have too many live albums. And that is the kind of a business you would imagine them to have. Now, whatever it is the case, I still think vote with your wallets. If you think having multitude of live albums, having pants or vegan doggy food or whatever is the kind of stuff you want to buy just because you love a band, well, go do it. I mean, it's not my money anyway, so why should I care about your money? But in case you want to kind of hold on, cling to the very idea that, metal bands should not be that much brands or products. I mean, it's not like they're Coca-Cola or whatever. Maybe you should give it another thought. Are these kind of a multitude of live albums actually worth buying because, hey, you love the music? I really don't know what to answer to this because there are a multitude of ways to go with the answers and all that stuff, and this video gets already too long. But I still can't help that I feel like we're losing some of the bands to the allure of commercialism, and I can't be too happy about it. But we as individuals have to do our decisions by ourselves. What are your thoughts? Would you buy 6 or even more live albums of your favorite band because, hey, I just want to support them? Or do you like the music so much? Or are you gonna show the middle finger and go other ways? Whatever is your answer, please put them on the comment box below. I will be happy to read them, and should there be enough interesting conversation, maybe another video will be done, maybe not. Meanwhile, go enjoy your business, have a great weekend. Rauta signing off.